Today, too, I want to discuss um, a general approach and a general understanding of what it is that we are doing here and what it is that we are accomplishing. This question seems to be a little bit odd because everybody is learning, and to whatever extent we understand, we absorb, we remember what we learn, everybody gets something out of the learning. But then, by the same token, we know that Torah is infinite. And even that part of Torah that is, generally speaking, reachable by the average yeshiva bocher is pretty far from the reach of the average bocher here at Seagate. Hopefully they will all reach the highest heights. But nevertheless, there is a limit how much a person can accomplish in a relatively short time. In addition to the added on difficulty, that we find it difficult, many of us, to relate to the learning that we are doing from the perspective of the type of learning we are used to prior to coming to yeshiva. Prior to coming to yeshiva, everybody here has had some kind of studies, some kind of learning experience. And usually, when you go through a year of learning, you have an accounting. You can pass a test, you can show something for your effort. And then you go to the next year. And after 4 years of study, you get a diploma. And here we come and we labor probably more with greater effort, with much more diligence than anything we've done before. We sweat over it. Then we turn around and we say, okay, where is my reckoning? What have I covered? What do I know? And basically speaking, what did I accomplish? And that can become a little bit discouraging. And as a matter of fact, some of us have difficulty in getting into the learning process on a daily basis. They sit for a half hour and then they lose it, and then they have to get a new inspiration to go on with it. And I want to explain, I want to, so to speak, go through together with you and through the process of the learning that's going on here and understand what it is that's actually happening. We have spoken in the past about the definition of seichel, of intelligence, as viewed from the Torah and from Chassidus. Basically, we pointed out that intelligence does not at all mean the ability to acquire knowledge, the ability to negotiate various obstacles and to figure things out. But rather, intelligence is a human capacity for insights that is exclusively human. for insights that give the world a human definition. And not only a human definition, but even a godly definition. As I pointed out, it's just as an aside, that we know that the beginning of the Torah, what is the first verse in the Torah? The Torah introduces the world to us. The Torah says, what is the world? Reishis bara Elokim et hashamayim v'haaretz. How are we to view the world? Not as, oh, it's here. Let's see what it is. But we have to know, straight in the beginning, that there was a time that the world wasn't here at all, and God, for His godly reasons, decided to create it. And that's what the world is about. We are to view the world in totally different approach and perspective than we see it outside of Torah. Outside of Torah, the world is taken for granted, and the studies are all to understand with the nature and how it operates. And here we come from a state of prior to existence of the world, and we're introduced to it. We say, hey, this is a creation. Who created it? God created it. And all that has to have tremendous significance to us. Not only the fact that the world has come into being at some point in time, and there was a time that it wasn't, but that it was brought into being by God Himself. It wasn't an evolutionary process. It's something that God intentionally created, just the way it is. This is what we mean by human intelligence and by godly intelligence. To see things from a perspective from a perspective of truth that is not necessarily readily demonstrated by our observation, because none of us were present at the creation of the world. All of us came into the world much well into a mature world, so to speak. The world having gone through a long history. And yet, we have the capacity in our intelligence to see the world from its inception. As if it's not here and now it's being created. That's human intelligence. The Mishnah says, in somewhat different words, but this thought, Ezehu Chocham, the Chocham is Horoya as Hanoilot. Chocham, the wise, is the one who sees, Horoya, who can see Hanoilot, that which is born. So there is the simple meaning of this verse as interpreted up in Nigla. The Pashas, it means Horoyas Hanoilot, that he can see ahead what a certain action will bring about. The Noilot, what is going to be the consequence of his actions, what is going to be born out of it. But then there is an insight, a deeper insight, a Chassidish explanation to this verse, and that is, what is a Chocham? What is the perspective that one has as a result of his Chocham? It is that he sees Noilod, he sees how the world is continuously being born and recreated. He does not see the world as an existent entity, and he is locked into it just the way it is. He sees it being born from scratch, from nothingness, all the time. Your gesture means, what does that mean? In simple answers, I want to discuss it, but just to keep your mind at ease so you can follow without discussion. It means the following. You know what inertia is? Inertia is a physical law, a law of physics, a natural law. And the law is that if you throw something, and there's a certain movement, that movement will continue to continue without change unless something stops it. Like a car, you drive a car, and then you turn off the motor. Does the car stop instantaneously? It continues to run because it has the power of inertia, the power of movement. It continues to run. You understand that, right? But then this car is running aimlessly. It's just going. It doesn't make a decision every second. It says, oh, I still have the power of inertia. I'm supposed to go a little further. I still have it. Let me go a little further. And then it's just going without hesitation, without consideration. Which means it's a meaningless, aimless, purposeless movement. It's just happening. It's just there. This is the view that one has of a world that just exists. It exists now because it existed a minute ago. So it continues to be. It's inertia. It's just there. I better make the best of it. But basically it's just there. Once it's created, it's aimless. So we have the capacity to see the world from a different perspective. No. Every instant there's a new decision. Just when a person walks. A person is not constrained within inertia. He can walk and stop on the dime. Every step that he makes is motivated by a decision. You can't say that he is walking now because he walked a minute ago. It has nothing to do with it. If he walks now, it's because he's walking now. He's making now the decision to make one more step. You understand this? This means that it gets born. Every step is a new decision. It is not just the result of the previous step. And when you say the world gets born on a continuous level, on a continuous basis, means that it gets recreated intentionally. There's a meaning to its existence, and the meaning, it's a new decision now for the world to be, not because it was here a minute ago. It's a new world all the time. It's a living world. It's a world that God imbues with life. You're with me now, right? Okay. Coming back to the central theme of what I want to discuss with you in terms of the time spent and our learning and our accomplishments. To illustrate and to introduce the Indian, I have the following illustration. We have 5 sensual faculties, 5 senses. These senses are the means through which we are aware of the world. You're aware of ourselves, you're aware of our surroundings. That's besides our intelligence, our seichel and so forth. There are senses. Senses means that we can sense what's going on around us, outside of ourselves. What are the 5 senses? Touch, smell, hearing, sight, uh, and taste. Okay. Each one of these senses has its particular function. And each one of these senses has it exists on the physical level, and it exists correspondingly on a higher and a spiritual level. Such as when you say there is taste in a piece of food, in a piece of cake, and similarly, sometimes you say, "Oh, this piece of gemara is gishmak." There is a spiritual taste, and once spiritual taste develops because he has had the physical taste. And the same is true regarding all five senses. The Gemara says that the tastes, the faculties are so interrelated that a child, in order for the child to develop intellectually, it has to have had physical experience. And the first thing that an infant recognizes, to call and to refer to, are his parents. It's the Abba Ve'ema, Tati and Mami. The Gemara says that a teenage does not have the intelligence to call Tati and Mami until he will taste the tam yoga, until he will taste the taste, not the food, the nourishment, but he will have had experienced the taste of corn, of corn that Doshna Gemara means grain, piece of bread, or something in the five grains. This has some kind of a basic taste that awaken certain qualities in the person and allow him to relate to things on a certain intellectual level, that intelligence itself becomes real. Up until that time, he also sees Tati and Mami, but it's not real enough that he should be able to refer to them by name. We can't have in this context describe, pursue this to its end, but this is a Gemara. Ein atinik yochel likre Abba ve'ema sheyitim tam dogan, just to quote the Gemara. Now let us say a person, healthy in every way, but he's missing one of these senses. He's missing any one of these senses, from touch, hearing, chas v'sholom, or taste, or smell, or sight. Every other way he can operate, but he's missing one of these senses. Compare that shortcoming to a person, chas v'sholom, missing a limb. He is obviously an invalid. And here he is completely healthy, but he's missing a certain sense. Doesn't work. We will all readily recognize that missing any of the senses has a much more profound effect on the person than anything else. If he is missing, chas v'sholom, a limb, which is tragic in itself, but it doesn't compare to when he doesn't have a sense. Then he is just not fully experiencing life, no matter what he does. It's not fully there. amongst the senses, there are those that are more important, more significant, and those that are less important, less significant. As I said, they're all basically imperative. There must be, in order just to be a healthy human being, a full-fledged human being, a wholesome human being. But then, obviously, there is difference. A person is missing the sense of taste. It's not as serious as if he's missing the sense of touch. And so forth. But then the Gemara tells us a very interesting thing. That if a person has all his senses and all his faculties, there is not one sense that categorizes the person as outside of the pale of the living, except for the sense of sight. If one does not see, he is categorized in the Torah as chav kimeis. Like he's lifeless. He's not alive. Why does the Gemara call him lifeless? He can eat, he can talk, he can think. Choshev kimeis. That's what the Gemara says. Asuma choshev kimeis. And the explanation to this is related to what we explained before. It says, "Ha'chocham royes hanoilot." Every other faculty, every other sense tells the person about the presence of the physical world. But it only introduces him to the physical world as a physical entity. For instance, touch does not tell him that this is a table. It tells him that there is something here. It doesn't tell him, it doesn't give him an insight of the truth of what he sees, of what it is. He just responds to touch. And this is true regarding every sense, even hearing. He has a sound. The sound comes from someplace, but it doesn't it doesn't give him the sense that this is a reality. Sometimes a person can have sound coming from something. It seems to him that he hears something from some kind of a shake in his head or whatever. Sight has a very, very profound effect on the person. And that is, as we discussed previously in the previous sessions many times, and as we discussed earlier before, to Michal's question, sight gives a person the sense, in simple terms, that the world is for real. It is not just there because it's in my way, but it's for real. It's something which belongs there, which should be there. It has a meaning. It is something to be involved in. It is something to be pursued. It's something that is worth of being involved with. And when he doesn't have sight, he is kimeis. Doesn't mean that he can't function. He can function anything, but nothing has real meaning to him. He's just passing time. Let us step back a little bit now and try to examine how sight operates. When you read about a phenomenon, you read somebody describes in a book, or he describes to you verbally something that he had experienced. He is describing to you, he's talking to you about that experience. He describes to you every detail of what he had seen, and perhaps even how he felt about what he felt, what he saw. And after that he presented it, and it took quite a time and quite a bit of words to present it, you have a whole piece of knowledge, a chapter of information. That chapter of information you can store in your memory and say, oh, I remember this, I remember that, I've studied, I've learned about it. Then you come in contact with that same phenomenon yourself, but you see it. All the information that took all that time to absorb and to relate, you see in one instant. You come upon it, one instant you see it. I don't remember exactly what illustrations I've used here, but let's come to an obvious illustration. If somebody describes to you the Niagara Falls, and he can describe to you every detail. There are several falls, and so much water passes by, and it makes such a noise, and it gives this impression, and so forth. Where it's coming from, how it's coming down, how it turns, how the water falls, the entire phenomenon. And you know every detail of it. What happens afterwards when you yourself visit it? The experience of visiting it is totally different than the experience of having heard about it. You don't go back and visit, oh, that's what he was talking about when he said this. That's it. The whole site is a totally different presentation. The experience of seeing it is something completely different. You see the reality of it. It becomes real. And yet, you absorb it in 1 second. Just one sight. And you already saw it. You can then continue to see and continue to see more detail, but the very first impression is in one instant. You've seen it. So that the amount of information that you absorb by sight would seem to be much less than the amount of information that you absorb by reading about it. When you see it, it doesn't tell you that there are 5 million gallons of water passing by every minute. It doesn't. You don't know how much. You see the water coming down. Whereas when you read it, you can have all kinds of detailed information. And yet, everyone will agree that the value of seeing it supersedes the value of reading about it many times over. As a matter of fact, if you have seen it, that becomes an indelible memory. You don't forget having seen it. You can forget having read about it, or even the details of what you read. But what you saw, this leaves an impression, because it's a real experience, this seeing it. It's a real experience. It is something that stays with you forever. Not that seeing the Niagara Falls is such an important experience, just to illustrate the point that a sight that impresses you is an experience, not just a piece of information. Coming back to learning here. Outside of Torah, in secular in a intellectual pursuit, you can learn and know a tremendous amount about the natural world. How things work, what are the laws of nature that make things operate and interrelate and so forth. And it can be quite absorbing and quite interesting, and you feel that you know a lot. But with all this knowledge that you have, it is not a knowledge about something that is intrinsically real, which means it tells you this is how it works. This is what the laws of nature that are coming into play. But the very essence of it, is it for real? Is the world for real? Does the world belong there? Or is it just a facade? Is it an imaginary thing? That question is not answered. Which means you can touch it with every other faculty, except with the faculty with the sense of sight. It never becomes real. It's real only in the sense that it affects you. You have to conform to it, otherwise you're going to have trouble. But not in itself. Life never becomes reality in the sense that it is something that is to be pursued in and of itself as a truly valuable thing. At best, it says that if you ignore the responsibilities that come your way in life, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have discomfort. Now, let's take the following illustration. Again, I may have used this illustration before in my talks, I don't remember, but just for the sake of our purposes here. We know that when a person is in prison, his greatest wish, single wish, is to be freed out of prison. This is what he dreams about. Now, consider the following. While he's in prison, number one, he doesn't have to worry about his needs. His food is taken care of, his shelter is taken care of. He can relax, and then he can relax and feel comfortable and safe.
Just like this place. Just like this place.
And then, in some of the more progressive prisons in this country, he even can venture outside. He can even play tennis. I don't know about golf. Really? Okay. So he's mamash in Gan Eden.
He's mamish what?
In Gan Eden.
Oh, it's not
And yet, and yet, his only wish all the time is, when can I get out of here? What happens when he gets out? When he gets out, then he has to worry about where his next meal comes from. How is he going to pay for rent, for shelter? And everything else. So where's the logic? What sense does it make? But yet this is mamash, unexceptional. It's not exception. This is definitely a fact. No matter what you give him in prison, doesn't compare to what he has outside in freedom. What is behind it? What's missing? What is it that he seeks in freedom? I understand if the prison is in some place in Iraq, I can understand he wants to get out of it. But I'm talking about normal. He has his bed. He can even have friends in there and play cards and chess. What's missing? What's driving him out of there? Free choice. What's in free choice? Let's illustrate. Let's go take it a step further. Let's take it a step further. In being in prison, he was confined within a certain area. He couldn't venture outside of the gates of the prison. Within the gates, he can walk around. And for all you know, there's a golf course over there. He can run to his exhaustion. Right there. He is free. He's out of the gate. What is the first thing he does? Does he then start running in every direction that his eyes take him? Say, oh, I couldn't go there, let me run there. I couldn't go there, let me run there. Does he go around, running around the world? Every place that he couldn't go before? Doesn't do anything like that. What does he do? He goes home. What's on home? He's back between four walls. He sits down and relaxes, and he tells of his experience in that prison. He says, oh, that was terrible. Oh, thank God I'm here in these four walls. Over there, those four walls were terrible. What happened? What happened is precisely this nakuda. That when he is in prison, he is not in the real world. He is in the world that was created by human beings around him. The real world that that a human being lives in is an infinite world. A world in which whatever you need to do, you have to create it as hanoilod. You have to create it from nothing. There is always a purpose and a meaning to everything he does. It's not just a state of existence. It's a creative state. In prison, God forbid, he lives in a man-made world. He gets up at a certain time because that's the law of the prison, not because it's the right thing to do, not because there's a godly purpose in this. That's the law of the prison. The prison God sets this law. He has to go to sleep on time because that's the law of the prison. He has to eat. He has to eat good food, everything. But it's all because that's the law of the prison. It's not a godly law. He does not have the freedom to relate to truth, to relate to reality. And he's ready to forego and to sacrifice all these comforts and securities just for the opportunity to breathe fresh air. His own air that comes straight from Hashem. Not artificial air provided by human beings. There's an interesting Rashi, coming down from the Gemara, from the Medrash, to this effect. It says by Noach that when the dove came back, the dove was sent out 3 times. The second time it came back, it brought back an olive leaf to Noach. And this told Noach that the waters are subsiding, and that already you can catch some leaves, some trees, and so forth. So the Gemara says, the Medrash says that this was actually a hint on the part of this dove to Noach, saying to Noach, "You were feeding me for all." They were confined in the teva, in the box for a whole year. You're feeding me, and I don't have to worry about food or anything. I really appreciate it. But believe me, I would rather have a bitter, because the olive leaf is bitter. And the food that Noach fed it was good food, suited for a dove. So he says, I would rather eat bitter olive leaves coming straight from God's hand than to eat the sweet food that you feed me. With all due appreciation. What is happening in today's world, and maybe in yesterday's your world also, but this is what we're clearly experiencing, and this is what brings us here. In the world, in the big world, in the outside world, outside of the confines, quote unquote, of the yeshiva, it's not a confining, outside of the life and Torah world, you can develop every faculty. Everything can make sense. You can develop every sense, except for the sense of sight, which means I see everything, but nothing makes sense. Nothing tells me, Royas HaNoilod, what is this all about? And therefore, what is my life confined to? I'm confined to living within the confines of the world, of a natural world, of an artificial world. Just, it's there. I have to accept it. The faculty of sight, which means it tells me, that gives me the opportunity to see things for real, doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that I don't see the physical world, but I see the physical world the same way as I hear the physical world. As a matter of fact, it's an interesting point. In high school geometry, I don't know, everybody probably had gone through high school geometry. In the textbook, I've seen this, in the textbook of high school geometry, it tries to explain to the student what's geometry about. And how does it introduce it? It says, it gives him what's called an optical illusion. Everybody knows what an optical illusion is. Optical illusion, for those who don't know, is that if you can present the same object in 2 different forms, 2 different angles, and it looks to you, and it gives you a different impression. If you put a line, a curved line this way, it looks this length. If you put it this way, it looks longer or shorter. An optical illusion. And it says to him that, you see, these 2 lines are identical in length. But it looks to you that one is longer than the other. What does that tell you? Don't trust your sight. It's exactly what it says. It's an interesting, interesting point. Sight, which is the finest and the most perceptive of the senses, and is supposed to relate to the person, the reality, in the most profound way from all other senses, says, hey, wait a second, don't trust your sight. You can trust your hands, your measuring, you can also trust your hearing, but don't trust your sight. When you come here and we start learning Torah. And each one of us comes to learn Torah at the stage that we come. It's a struggle. First we have to struggle over the words. We stumble over the reading, over the words. And then we try to translate it, and we can't even relate, because to translate from one language to another, let alone from Lashon Kodesh to any other language, is very, very difficult. There isn't a precise translation. It's not word-for-word translation. And there are multiple meanings. There are secondary and third level meanings to a word which don't even exist in the English language. And all that you have to learn slowly and struggle over it. And after all the struggle, you go through a week, you go through a month, and then you say, okay, what ground have I covered? What ground have I covered? I'm moving at a snail's pace. I've covered the whole Mishnah. Wow, I covered the whole Mishnah. I covered 2 Mishnahs. I covered 5 lines of Gemara. And when you start measuring it in that way, you're kind of taken aback. You know, when I was in school, I covered a whole book in one night. What's happening over here? What happened to my intelligence? And the answer as to what is happening is what is brought out by this whole discussion. Quantitatively, very little. But qualitatively, what happens is that at some point in time you struggle, something strikes, some bright spark, some bright light shines through in your mind. Oh, that's what it means. And this bright light is related to sight. You have sighted something. And that which one sighted, number one, is permanent, because you saw it. And number two is real. Once one understood any simple piece of Gemara, but he understood the svaras, he understood the concept. His sense of the reality of the world has changed permanently. You're learning, just to illustrate the point, you're learning Masechta Kedushin, right? That's what you're learning. Whatever piece of Gemara you're learning, I don't know exactly where or what, but just the essence of the Masechta. Masechta Kedushin speaks about marriage, how you can be Makadesh a woman and becomes a wife. And he tells us how he can be Makadesh, what are the means to be Makadesh. the in the world also this relationship of marriage exists. And what is the difference between this relationship as defined in the Torah and as defined in the world? As defined in the world, it is a man-made, a human phenomenon. It's an agreement between two people. It's no different than buying a camera or getting any kind of agreement. One is the people make an agreement, and this agreement is a man-made agreement, and in other words, it is surface deep. It's just at the level of their agreement, and they can agree and then disagree. And here we have a completely different approach and different insight in this. And we says, hey, this is not a man-made thing. Yes, human beings can accomplish it, but what happens as a result is that a real thing, a real bond is created. And just by giving the man giving the woman a penny or a pruta, she becomes a married woman in every sense of the word. Who calls her a married woman? Not the people around him. God Himself says this is marriage. It is a newly created state. It is not an agreement between two people and they remain the same two people as they were before. It's a newly created state. And this is the value of the quality of sight. I spoke to a couple of guys yesterday, just want to illustrate the power of sight. As we said before, sight is the one faculty that relates the person to the reality of the world, makes the world real to him. And without sight, the Gemara calls him a mace. He's lifeless. He's dead to the world. So I have this following illustration. We have two people, both, God forbid, sightless. They're both sightless. One has been sightless from birth, which means he's never seen light. And one lost his sight at some later age, some later time. We can readily see the difference between these two people. The one who does not see, who never saw, does not have an idea of the reality of the reality of the world at all. The one who had seen knows what the reality is. He misses it very dearly, very profoundly, very deeply. But he still knows what reality is. This gives us an illustration of what happens when one learns Torah. You learn a little bit, you learn more or less, whatever you attain. The moment that you have understood something penetrated, something brightened up in your mind, you have experienced sight. You have experienced a reality. And as we have seen from the illustration of the prisoner and from various of our own experiences, we are ready to sacrifice anything just to regain our freedom, just to regain a contact with reality. So this is from a simple human experience position. just to end off, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that for the purpose of this recognition, even for one moment, of the truth, of a godly truth in the world, this is the whole purpose of the neshama coming down to the world. For this one moment, for this one bright moment, for this one moment when one does a mitzvah truly, the neshama comes down into the world just for this alone. Everything else he does is either obstacles or preparation for it, but the real accomplishment in a person's life is to reveal that moment of truth. Having had that moment of truth, he still has to face a lifetime of struggle in the world. But he has a totally different approach, a totally different resource, strength with which to face it. Because he knows that the world, that it's real, it knows that it's worth the struggle. There's more to speak about this, which we'll have another chance to develop this, but this is like a first step, insight and understanding what it is that here in Yeshiva everyone is afforded the opportunity to gain and to accomplish. And essentially you can even say you come to the yeshiva in a state of faint, and you come out of the yeshiva in a bright and a living state. Everything else is peripheral. Everything else is practical learning. But to bring a person back to life, that's the first thing. To come out of prison, that's the first thing. A prisoner, after he comes out of prison, has to learn how to live in the real world. He has to get training. He has to get a job. He has to learn how to behave under new circumstances. But the first thing is he's alive. When we come to face the world, everyone here are adults, and recognizes that sooner or later the responsibilities of life are going to be upon him. These are not children. And there are multiple things that one has to do to prepare for the responsibilities of life. Such as he has to have a trade, he has to be able to earn a living, he has to be able to get around. But the first thing he has to have, the first primary thing that a person has to have in order to face life is to have a meaning for life. To have the strength that life provides so that he is ready, he can face any challenge. And this is what we get from learning Torah. And so in conclusion, what I'm hoping for is not just the idea, but everyone will utilize their time here as strictly, as a gift from heaven, really, because everyone here came at a later age. It's like an opportunity that was mama's a gift, a heavenly, a godly gift that has to be treasured and not wasted. Matzliach.
Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi.